Regina.
So I'm curious about the support staff. Who interviews them? Who makes the hiring decisions? And how do you keep, if they're the people that are writing the bills, how do you keep their political bent out of it? You know, who goes back and supervises the end product?
Joe, you want to start?
Yeah, great question. Mike Mahler, who's the head of one of the departments, does much of the interviewing. I've only been down there for 2 sessions, and I have never, in all the bills I've either ran or worked on with my colleagues, I've never once felt someone was being partisan. I mean, they are nonpartisan to a fault. And I'd love to hear Shawn's answer on this. I just feel like they really come at it where their job's on the line. And if they come across a Democrat or Republican, believe me, one of my colleagues will go right to their boss and say, I think they're pushing an agenda. I found them being fair. And I know you may not agree with that answer. I believe them.
I'll largely endorse what Joe said. I'll elaborate a little bit. Each caucus, the majority in the House and in the Senate, also have caucus staff that are hired by the elected leadership. The few staff members are chosen by the Senate majority and the Senate minority, and the same in the House. That's the partisan staff. The nonpartisan staff, drafters are chosen by the leadership of Legislative Legal Services, interviewed and hired by whatever their hierarchy is. Same thing over on Leg Council that does the staffing and broader policy research for the legislature. And I've almost never thought that staff was being partisan. Occasionally I'll think that someone is just too institutional or too establishment oriented and just can't quite see what I want them to put on paper. I don't think it's philosophical hostility so much as a blind spot on the part of the drafter. But the ultimate check is the legislator is responsible for what he or she accepts, puts their name on, and introduces into the process. And they certainly have their own resources. They could ask other people to read and make suggestions. And if they tell the drafter, I want it to say X, Y, and Z instead of A, B, and C, the drafter has to do what they ask.
So let me follow up with that. How specific are you guys when you go to the drafters? Do you just kind of have like an idea, I want to accomplish X, help me do that? Or do you have specific like language sometimes you've already got written and you say, make this work?
Yeah, for me, I always start with the concept. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a bill drafter. I start with the concept, I say, here's a problem, and here's what I'm trying to resolve. And then I sit down with the drafter, and they usually do an initial draft. And Shawn is right, we'll sometimes have outside resources who are experts in a certain area, and we'll ask them to review, but as I would a constituent.
Jen?
Yes, what's the average size of a bill? Do you read all the bills you hear yourself, or does your staff help you with that? And could you please clarify for the audience, even though session is 120 days, how many days a year do you actually work on in your role?
Shawn?
I don't know if there's an average length of a bill. Some, it's usually at least a page or two. Some of them are very long. Some bills are a lot of substantive policy that ordinary people care about. Some bills are rewrites of the probate code that the Bar Association quibbles over in its bar committees and then brings you a 200-page drafted bill. Kind of going back to the question, sometimes you get a concept and you tell the drafter, I'd like a bill for world peace. Sometimes you get specific drafted language and say, I'd like you to put this on bill paper for me, please. So that varies. And the size of bills varies too according to their purpose. Is it a project that you originated? Is it something that industry specifically asks you to carry? As far as how many days that we work, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. Typically I don't work weekends during the session. I only work 5 days of the week. But outside of the 120 days of the session, there are a whole lot of interruptions for the real life we're supposed to be living. There are interim committees. Legal Services is a year-round committee that meets. There Audit Committee and other committees. It's hardly a part-time job being in the legislature. It's not a full-time job, except there are people that are able to make it a full-time job because they don't have the obligations to make a living and support a family. And it's kind of an unlevel playing field. And some of us would like to make the legislature more doable for people with real-life obligations, but there are others that it's their life and it's their hobby and it's their full-time pursuit, and they think it's pretty cool to spend all their time doing that. And they don't like proposals to shorten and reduce and streamline and simplify. So
I'll try to put a number on it. I'd say the average page bill I remember reading last year was about 10. and I read every bill that came through one of the 3 committees I served on. My most enjoyable committee, as a side note, is Audit Committee. We just had our last, actually Shawn and I both serve an audit, we just had our last Audit Committee of the year. It's one of the few committees that meets year-round, and by estimation, we've saved the taxpayers about $47 million by doing over 50 performance and financial audits to make sure that those departments run more streamlined and more effectively for the taxpayer. It's why it's my most enjoyable committee. We only make $30,000 a year. In terms of working year-round, I can say every day I'm either responding to an email, attending an event, having a constituent coffee at 8 a.m. at a coffee shop in my district. I do work full-time at Project Cure, the nonprofit organization I referenced earlier, and it's a juggle. I mean, it's tough having. I do full-time jobs. I'm a workaholic. I love it. It's just hard on the family, but you're always doing something year-round.
I know we've got at least 4 more questions. Yes, sir. We'll start with you.
As you well know, there's been a tremendous swell of interest in the campaigning, the elections, probably higher than average. And I'm curious, I'm anticipating that there will probably be likewise a swell in interest in legislation, in business going through your offices, in citizenry really interested in the process. How do you anticipate handling a swell, and how will that affect business as usual for you on your side?
Joe, you can start off.
Yeah, sure. I've got 2 part-time inmates during the session. They make $10 an hour. They only work about 15, 20 hours a week. I'll have 3 extra interns. They're all volunteer. And then I've got about 3 people who are research experts. They do research on the side out of their home, their computer for me. So, as you can see, most of that's volunteer. But with those basically 6 extra volunteers either working in my office or out of their home, that allows me to spread the jobs to more people. So my 2 part-time staff during the 4-month session are overloaded.
Will we have a sense that with that swell that we will have an opportunity to interact reasonably well?
I make a pledge to every one of my constituents. I'll give you at least a half hour at a coffee shop or at the Capitol so we can sit down and talk. To me, that's where the real democracy gets accomplished.
John?
I hope you're right. I'm not sure you are, that the uprising of attention and citizen participation that we saw leading up to election season will carry over into governing season. I think the future of our republic depends on it, but I don't know how much staying power there is. If the swell is manifest in people wanting to come to committee hearings and testify on bills, there's a pretty defined process, and certainly that can be accommodated. If it means will legislators be more available to respond to more calls and letters, that will vary by legislator, and I pledge to try and do better.
And regarding those committee hearings, they are open to the public, and anybody can come down there and sign up and be heard. So take advantage of that if you have that opportunity. Mr. McNeely.
Follow-up question to how things are drafted. You mentioned that there's sometimes outside resources. How often are those outside resources that are drafting bills lobbyists and special interest groups?
Shawn, you want to start?
Quite often, because often it's an industry group or a recreational group or an association that has an interest in an issue that brings it to a legislator and says, we're concerned that the law is X and we really think it should be Y, so you've got ready input. And I don't know if that sounds sinister or wholesome. I think it can be either, but in fact it's simply segments of society petitioning government and approaching their lawmakers and looking for responsiveness from their government. I guess the other thing to say is whether it's the Libertarian Party or the Independence Institute or the National Rifle Association or Rocky Mountain Gun Owners or Planned Parenthood, if a legislator has a measure in an area that they're interested in, typically they will designate someone else as a contact on the bill too, that the drafter can talk not just to the legislator but to the outside group, although I don't know if the Libertarian Party has ever been designated as contact on drafting a bill. But
no, we have not. But you each have my cell phone number, and I'm easily reached.
Actually, I'm just going to give my power of attorney to David Williams. And, anyway, the input, the legislator can get the draft and give it to another group, or they can just put the group on the distribution list, and the drafter will send it to everyone listed, and the input is sort of group flow.
Joe?
There's about 1,100 registered lobbyists at the state capitol to 100 legislators, so it's 11-to-1 ratio. You don't see half of them very often because they're very single issue focused. Like any industry, I think there's good ones and bad ones. I've found some to be extremely good resources for helping me draft a bill. I'll give you an example. It's a good bipartisan example. The Colorado Criminal Justice Reform League. It's there's a woman named Christy Donner, who's their executive director. She worked with Representative Mark Waller, Republican district attorney, state representative from El Paso County, myself and many members of the Judiciary Committee, and passed a bill to try to put more money into drug treatment versus the prisons, because about half the folks in prison are drug related. And the cops endorsed it, the sheriffs endorsed it, there were many quote stakeholders that endorsed it. I think the Libertarian Party endorsed it, and we're going to save the taxpayers about $15 million a year. Now, this woman, Christy, I didn't immediately just trust her. Over 2 years, I've only been down there for 2 sessions. I got to know her, and I liked her. I liked the way she thought. I liked the way she treated people. I liked the way she offered ideas to whoever was a stakeholder sitting around a table discussing a bill. She's become someone I trust. The same way I trusted Barry Keene, the Republican constituent, who helped me draft a health care billing streamlining bill. So it just comes down to relationships. There's going to be good ones and bad ones.
And given all the bills you guys have to deal with every year, you mentioned it's impossible to be an expert on every issue, from water rights to mining to criminal justice and everything else, and the lobbyists aren't going to be experts in a given category, and they're just a resource to use, at least sometimes.